After your recent autobiography, you swore you'd never write another book. Can I ask you what changed your mind?
Well, I ran off with the editor of the Harvard Business Review and traveled the world and had literally hundreds of thousands of questions raised. And I realized my first book was an autobiography, but it didn't really answer the questions that were on people's minds. So with my wife, Susie, after 3 years of traveling and talking to close to 300,000 people, we gathered all the stuff that we had been asked and tried to codify it in some cohesive manner and put it in a book to address the concerns that were on so many people's minds. So that's, I thought I'd never do it again, but it's a hell of a lot more fun writing it with your wife than it is some writer, I'll tell you that.
Clearly the theme is winning, the title is winning. Here we are in a, well, not quite in a business school, we're in the extension of London Business School here, but and a room full of people going through many of our degree programs of one kind or another. Can I ask you a question about business schools? Can business schools help people win?
I think without question, what you get in a business school is another notch on your belt. You learn to critically think against a tougher set of competition, your peers. You go down a number of paths, challenging a number of issues, seeing how well you perform relative to others, gaining another notch of self-confidence in testing your thinking and seeing how it works. On the other hand, you waste a lot of time on a bunch of silly courses too. A lot of stuff, way too much on strategy, way too much on things like disruptive technologies. Nowhere near enough on human resources. In your lifetime, you'll be organizing and leading people. You'll be exciting them, you'll be managing them, you'll be leading them to new challenges. You don't get enough about that. You'll be evaluating, you'll be hiring, you'll be firing. All those things that you'll do every single day, you rarely get in most business schools. So that, I think, is the weakness in the business school program. We were at Dartmouth this year and they've instituted for the first time a critical evaluation system in the class where each kid has to evaluate their peers in the class, draw the 20-70-10, if you will, and then explain to people where they fit in face-to-face confrontations. It'll be an interesting experiment, but it's one that you'll do in your lifetime, and I think it's one. The other thing that I think I'd like to leave you with, or at least give you some thinking about, while you're at the London Business School, it's all about you. It's you excelling. It's you raising your hand, having the answer, writing the best case, or responding to a class in some way. Once you go out into the workplace, you'll do that again for a while. Then you'll become a manager or a leader. And the biggest failure I see in this transition is it's going to go from being about you, the person, to being about them, your team. And so many people fail in that transition. You'll only be as good as the team you build around you. It'll be all about them. So for those of you who end up leading teams where you're the smartest, shame on you. That's the dumbest idea in the world, to end up with people that aren't smarter than you working for you. You want that. You want to be gleaning ideas all the time from people. So if I give you one piece of advice, is be sure as hell you build great teams and you realize that building them, the reflected glory from their successes, are what will rocket you to higher and higher positions.
I did actually, on this issue, take note of your slightly critical comments about the scientific approach to strategy in business schools. And I quote you say, in real life, strategy is actually very straightforward. You pick a general direction and implement like hell. And as we're in the interest, as we're looking to reduce costs at London Business School at the moment, I guess we should close the strategy department and immediately expand the organisational behaviour department, which I happen to be a member of. So these words were absolutely wonderful to hear, and I'll pay you afterwards, Jack. Thanks very much. Can I, one of the book opens, some of you have read it I'm sure, but the book opens with sort of some underlying principles and philosophies and conceptual ideas, and the one which I found very appealing and interesting is your interest in candour, and how little of it there sometimes is in organisations and how much more we need. But I suppose candour can kill sometimes, or can be very risky. Why don't we get enough of it, and what would you suggest we should do to get more of it in organisations?
Well, if you're a leader, you clearly have to demonstrate it. You have to be open. You have to be able to admit mistakes. You have to be able to cut through the businessese. You've got to be able to talk to every person in your organization in such a way that they know where they stand. No one can be a manager without no one can call themselves a manager and have employees working for them when the employees don't know exactly where they stand, where they are relative to others, and where they're going in their career. When you're debating a deal, you've got to have an atmosphere where everybody gets it on the table, not massive PowerPoint slides, numbing charts that put people to sleep, but really dialogue, face-to-face, eyeball-to-eyeball confrontation about why the deal works or doesn't work. And you demonstrate that yourself. You yourself will be, if the place is tied up in its knickers, it'll be because you are setting an atmosphere that isn't open, isn't fun, making fun. We used to make fun of people that wouldn't be open, josh about it, just to try and lighten the thing up so they'd get there. Candour can kill you, though, because candour, if you're in a stiff, rigid hierarchy, you've got to be able to use it right. Because if nobody above you is practicing it and you coming in swing for the fences, it could be troublesome. So I happen to believe it speeds everything in business. It speeds decision making. It moves the organization competitively faster. It gets people to be open about where they fit. I was over at the BBC this week, and this place is the most paralyzed place I've seen in my lifetime. I mean, thousands of people are walking around frightened to death about what's going to happen. Are they going to get sacked? Every interview I had, they asked about, somebody here's going to get sacked in this new round we're going through here. And no one knew where they stood. And so the management there is just being cruel. So employees are walking around not knowing where they stand. You can't have an organization where people don't know where you, as the professor of organizational dynamics, but you've got to let people know where they stand. They can't be in this frightened paralysis state. Nothing happens.
I think there was a leader at the BBC who let people know where they stand, but he sadly lost his job a year or two ago. But
that's
another candour maybe on something else.
Yeah.
But we better not go into it here. I wrote, with candour, I wrote an article a few years back. Some people here know it. It's called Why Should Anyone Be Led By You? And I had the great privilege of working with Jack Cole for Susie on this article. One of the things we said in the article was that really good leaders don't strive for perfection. They kind of are at least a little comfortable with some of their imperfections, some of their weaknesses, some of the things they can't do. What weaknesses would you own up to in your own career, and did they change over time? Did they look different in the early Jack Welch career to the late career?
Well, I was tumultuous in the early career. I was totally impetuous. I've always had a stammer, so that's a weakness from the beginning to the end. I think that'll be there. I think if I go at it, I made mistakes on deals. I'd openly admit it. I'd walk around talking about it. If I can make this big a dopey move, anybody can make a move. Don't be paralyzed. I made lots of mistakes on people. I hired people in the early days. I hired them almost always on resumes and slickness, which is probably inversely proportional to talent. So I did a number of these things on a fairly frequent basis, but I talked about it. I think the thing is, talking about what your mistakes are helps an organization enormously.
Yeah.
It allows them to feel free to make them. I mean, I bought an investment bank kid at Peabody. No one could make a mistake bigger than that. Boo-boos that we had, we didn't know how to run it, we had breakdowns in the system. We ended up on the front page of the Wall Street Journal 17 times in 14 months. Right-hand column being called dopes. That's not fun. And we went through that because it was a cultural error that I personally made. And I owned up to it, talked to everybody about it.
If you look at your career with GE, there were clear sort of phases. The first early part was restructuring, the middle part was often to do with the software of the organization, workout and empowerment and so on. And the latter phase probably oriented towards speed. And could I ask you a question? It's also linked to one of my own interests really, which is when do you sense that you should change to a new agenda in an organization? How do you pick up the sense that you need to go from one set of initiatives to another? And it's clear that in your career you did this.
Only four, though. I mean, when you finally say it so many times that you gag. I mean, when you just repeat it over and over again to the organization, can't take another sentence of it. But, and you generally carry things too far. In my case, one of the weaknesses I see in many companies is flavor of the month. Immediately jumping from tactic to tactic to tactic. You could argue that at our place, we didn't change enough tactics fast enough if you wanted to. We did something and we stuck with it and we drove it home. Workout to get everybody involved, tens of thousands of meetings, literally tens of thousands of meetings till people were convinced that their ideas counted and the quality of an idea was determined by the idea. The quality of the idea was the key thing, not the stripes on the shoulder from where it came from. So it was that was a lot of convincing, maybe 4 to 5 years of continuous meetings. Driving home an issue like Six Sigma quality, years, and putting our best people on it. One of the things I want to leave you with, if you ever say something's important in your organization, and you know this from your organizational work, if you ever say something's important in your organization, you better put your best person on it. Because your whole organization is evaluating how important it is by who you staff it with. The biggest mistake CEOs make is, let me give you this big puffy speech about how critical this is. Inventory turns are critical. We need to get our cash flow improved. And then they hire Joe 4 months from retirement to lead the effort. And the whole place just goes into a yawn. Joe is like a gas pain, he'll go away. And that's what happens to the initiative. And so it's an enormous problem. You say something's important, staff it that way. Follow up that way. Closed loop measure that way. But I'm sure many of you have had experiences where people would articulate the criticalness of an issue and then put some okay player on it. Only your best.
Let's, perhaps this is the moment for me to, I've got many more questions I'd love to ask here, but I'm going to try and be less selfish. So let's get some of the experience of the people in the room. Some of you have very kindly submitted questions to me, and I have them in front of me. Sadly, I suspect I'm not going to be able to hit all of them. I'll hit as many as I can, and I'll also try and make as much room as I can for people to just lob in some questions. So, but if I may, to begin with, I'm just going to refer to one or two which are on here.
And we have mics here too, so come on, jump in.
Mics, and this is the moment for our roving mics to practice running as fast as possible. Julian Bassat, is she here? Julian is right near here at the front.
Go ahead, here's a mic.
Going to try and introduce some questions about the management of change, and I think some of yours has to do with this. So, Julian.
Hi, good morning, Jack. I had a question on, in organizations like GE, which are very large, which includes different businesses, 4 different businesses, the question I have is when you have key initiatives that comes from the top, how do you ensure proper execution through the organization, different businesses at different levels? From your point of view, how do you ensure that execution?
Purely through the human resource function. Purely through putting the best people on it, as I described. If you want to try something, you put the best people on it. Then you say, the stock options, let's say you want to change to a quality program, you want to change to a marketing program. The best people in the organization are going to lead this. And you announce that. Only people that are top 20% can possibly be on this project. Then you give out stock options. And guess what? You say you're going to give them to your best people. You give them to the people that are leading that change. And then you'll get a phone call from some of the people in the disparate business saying, hey, Jack, I don't have enough stock options. And you'll say back to them, but I gave them to your best people, the people you put on this initiative. Well, they really weren't our best, all of them. I mean, some of them weren't that good, and I need more options. I said, you're not getting any more options. You better change the people out and put the right people on it. So, I mean, I think everything has to be a closed loop. You drive it with people, you measure it with the people, and then you go visit it, and you go visit the progress. Now, you'll get a lot of air and nonsense when you go visit, and you'll see it'll be, I mean, for example, in Six Sigma, if the amount of savings I was presented in the course of Six Sigma were all added up, it would have been larger than the GDP of the United States. So, I mean, the PowerPoint slides can accumulate enormous events. So all these things are hyped to an extent, but they gotta be. You cannot make change with rational behavior. You cannot make change by, like, let's have a quality program. Quality is good, everybody. Let's go at it. Let's make sure our customers feel good with our quality. You gotta say, no, our quality stinks. We've got to improve it dramatically. Only the best people can be on it. Half of our offices by the year 2005 will have been black belts in quality. The stock options and the awards are going to those leading the efforts. And you got to be a maniac about it to move it. You got to be over here with the needle to get the needle here. Watch what will happen. The United States is being hit now with its second hurricane in 2 weeks. You will see a response on this hurricane that will be, the needle will be over here. We'll have more military, more reaction, more people, more things reacting to that, because that's how things go.
Can I just take it a bit further on? There's a very interesting chapter in the book on crisis management.
Yeah.
And reading it in the context of recent events in the States, it's slightly harrowing, actually, in terms of what it predicts. But would you say a bit more on crisis management and Katrina, and maybe the next one?
We have a chapter in here called Crisis Management. I've been through plenty in my life, 4 or 5 while I was CEO, and 1 I created afterwards. But nevertheless, it was, no, seriously, and nevertheless, the crisis goes like this. It's like an old movie. It's literally like an old movie. Every crisis you have will have this. The first one will be, if you're in a company and somebody's screwing up, there'll be denial. Massive denial. It couldn't happen. It couldn't happen. Hurricane Katrina, denial. Denial everywhere. 2, the second one is, shh, in a company, it's quiet. Let's keep it to ourselves. Yeah, that lasts about a minute. It's out. In Katrina, it was finger pointing. The mayor to the police chief, to this one, to the next one, everyone was finger pointing. That always happens. In the next stage of it, we call it shame mongering. Now comes, if you don't get out there and you define the situation and leave a vacuum, somebody else defines it. In this case, there was no, unlike 9/11 when we were attacked, where we had Rudy Giuliani on the front steps and the president right there and the governor. In this case, the mayor ran to Dallas and hid. The governor couldn't be found, and the president was down in Crawford, Texas. And as a result, all the enemies showed up. The media blasting it, the other party blasting the administration. I mean, somebody else fills the vacuum. That happens in every crisis. And the 4th step of every crisis is blood spills on the floor, always. In this case, the fellow that ran FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Organization, Michael Brown, he was the first blood, but there'll be more. There'll be politicians here and there who will all have blood on them for the poor handling of this. From George Bush on down, they'll have suffering and pain because of the way they handled it. This poor fellow was shot His qualifications were he had been an Arabian horse trainer prior to running the Federal Emergency Organization. That wasn't quite the qualifications needed to handle a national emergency in our country. He was a political appointee. And fifth, the crisis is usually overcooked. I mean, it gets fixed, but usually overdone. In the case of New Orleans, politicians will be bidding. First it was 10 billion, then it's 60 billion, now it's going to be 100, and now it'll be 200 by the time it's through. And the corrections are a while. I use the example of, I don't know if how many are familiar with the Tylenol problem we had in the States with tampering of pills. Well, if you ever buy a bottle of Tylenol now, you can't get it open. I mean, the overreaction is enormous. I mean, you need a vise and a scissors and a wrench to get it open. So that's, and you'll see this same immunity built into this current hurricane. Watch how well this is done. The problem is we don't make the same mistake twice, but we don't have the imagination to figure out where the next one's coming. So we do an incredible job with the immunity of the existing one, but we can't sort of reach beyond it to see the next one. We saw, after 9/11, we reacted amazingly well. And then Katrina hits. London seems to have a tremendous resiliency. I mean, after the July 7th tragedy here, we were all amazed in the U.S. at the resiliency and the strength and the stalwartness of the British people. I mean, it was a tremendous show of strength. I mean, overwhelming compared to what we normally experience. So there's some resiliency in this society that's been through bombings and wars and battles between countries and other things, and that somehow it's able to cope so much better.
Thank you for the compliment. Can I, Angela Alberston. Angela? She here? Angela? No? Is Farhan Laji here? Farhan? He's at the back, yeah. Now we need a very fast sprint to the back. We're still sticking with the, is he there? We're still sticking with the questions on change. So let's hear from you.
Well, my question was kind of hindsight. And kind of looking back, I was wondering if you could kind of give an example of a change that you instituted and when you might have turned around and said, okay, maybe that wasn't the right change to have instituted, and how you go about kind of fixing things when you've kind of made a decision, maybe in haste, or when you think that something's been done and you try to undo it.
Could you help me with that one?
Yeah, what I have in front of me is, did you ever introduce change in GE that you felt the organization frankly couldn't handle? It was the wrong thing to try to do. I think that's the sense of the question.
I think we probably, in Six Sigma, made the mistake of putting it in places it didn't belong. So in universally applying it to the company, it was totally rejected by the Hollywood community, in the creative community. I mean, it was just totally rejected. It made no sense in the end, and so we may have sent it to too many places. In the investment banking deal business in GE Capital, we may have sent it to a place that wasn't necessary. It works perfectly where there's lots of routine processes. It works incredibly well. It works well with dealing with customers to reduce variation in dealing with them. In the very back creative one-off deals, like a new comedy show, a new this, it's not something that I would have blasted it. But in order to make it important, we had to go everywhere. In some places, it was rejected.
Rudy Hofsappel, is Rudy? Rudy's at the back. Maybe last question, but this is interesting on the organizational change issue and organizations, but Rudy.
Yeah, hi, and welcome to London, by the way. I was just wondering, George Rathman, he was the founder of Amgen, and he said in one of his books... George Rathman, he was the founder of Amgen, and he said in one of his books that bureaucracy is for the people who are undisciplined and untalented, and it sort of creates a vicious circle that drives out the people who are talented and who may be less disciplined, but who take organizations forward. And you brought about so much change, but you were at the helm of this huge organization, which needs bureaucracy in a way. So how do you feel about that?
Well, first of all, you make a value. In our case, the way I approached it was we had a values card, which were boundaryless behavior, which meant sharing ideas with each other. One of our other values, we had 7 values. One of our other values was hate bureaucracy and the bureaucrats that practice it. Published on a card. Very few culture cards in corporations say hate bureaucracy and the bureaucrats that practice it. We ridicule bureaucrats. We went at them, and when I left 21 years later, I was still ridiculing bureaucrats because it's like an insect. You can't find it. Everybody wants to add a layer. Layers are sinful. Every time you add a layer, you've created a sin. We're not in a church here today, but I mean, you've created a violation. Layers just filter. They slow. And they're given out by bureaucrats in lieu of pay in order to give somebody a little promotion and have them sit on top of people. You should have spans that are wide. 15 people reporting to you, so you can't meddle in their activities. And when you don't do that, you build bureaucracies. Now, you'll never get bureaucracy out of large institutions. It's needed to run the system. All you can do is flail against it with everything in your body to try and minimize it, so you do keep the excited entrepreneurial spirit in the company, and you don't lose those people you mentioned who can't stand working for bureaucrats and filling out forms and doing all that. So, I mean, it is something that you'll never stop fighting, but if you recognize you have it, and I'll tell you, if you go to a company of any size of several thousand people or more, you've got it by definition. You've got to fight like hell to get rid of it because it's nothing but trouble.
Can I ask for some questions just going outside organizations? I'm going to move to the issue of outsourcing and Stephen Wang in a moment, but there's a question far right, who's probably not on my list here, but if Stephen Wang's here too, perhaps he can grab a mic for the next question. So before that, yeah.
Jack, you're a known advocate of rank or gap, an assessment system that rewards employees who do well, but gets rid of those who don't. And
Could you get the microphone nearer?
You said that this helps people know where they stand. But that system's also being questioned, not least at Enron, where it did create a supercharged competitive culture, but also a situation where people cut corners. Can you comment on that, please?
Yeah, I wouldn't classify Enron's problems with the differentiated management system. I think that's a long cord to stretch to that. And Enron had a flawed culture where people cheated, just plain cheated. If you read the book Conspiracy of Fools, you'll get a first-hand read on what went wrong at Enron. It wasn't a human resource system. A human resource system that differentiates people, lets people know exactly where they stand. It allows people in the top 20 to be rewarded, the middle 70 to be encouraged to get there, and it identifies the bottom 10. The bottom 10 then, once identified, aren't cut, their throats aren't cut. They're told they're in the bottom 10, and 75 to 85% of these people leave on their own. Who wants to work in a place where you don't fit? And very often they go on to a place having learned something there where they fit just fine. Give me a better system of letting people, of building a great team. Sports teams do it, your football teams. That's how they operate. The stars are taken care of, the middle is improved, and the bottom is let go. Rather harshly. In companies, you don't have to do it that way. You can give them a year, they can find another place, they know where they are. The worst kind of manager, if you ever end up being one of those, shame on yourselves. It's the kind manager. I'm too kind to let anybody know where they stand. I don't want to tell people their shortcomings. I don't want to do that. Then a recession comes. A slowdown in the market comes. And all of a sudden, you go in, and you have to talk to Harry. And you say, Harry, business is terrible. We've got to cut costs. The Chinese are here with a lower cost product. We've got to do something. And Harry, I'm sorry, but you're going to have to leave, Harry. And Harry said, why me? He said, well, you aren't very good, Harry. You really haven't been very good. And Harry said, but I've been here 31 years, and no one's ever told me that. That's the BS system. That's the system with the kind managers. It's the cruelest form of leadership known. It's like keeping bad businesses and having them as orphans over to the side, where the worst people hang out, the leper colony, where they hang out with weak businesses and no market position, and everybody sort of stays away from them. That's the same sort of thing, but don't face into it. You sell a weak business to a strong company. I sold an air conditioning business where we stunk in. We were about 10, 11% share of a central air conditioning business. I sold it. The company went crazy. It was one of our core businesses. We had never made much money in it. I sold it to a company called Train, which is a large air conditioning company. I called the guy that was running it about a month afterwards. And I said, Stan, tell me, how is it being with Train? He said, Jack, you can't believe it. I love it. He said, my boss loves air conditioning. The people around me love air conditioning. Every day I saw you, you hated air conditioning. You hated the business. You bitched at me all the time about my results. And now I'm with a place that air conditioning's everything. So you don't do any favors carrying losing businesses or people that are weak until later in life when they don't have options. You all have an obligation as early as you know somebody's not going to make it, to give them a chance to start again somewhere else, and not carrying them into their 40s and then 50s when their options for careers are limited.
I think we're back to the issue of candour again, and perhaps I should share something with you, Jack. I support a soccer team in London. It's called West Ham. It specialises in selling the top 20 players and keeping the bottom 10. It sort of explains a lot to me now, actually.
It might be a reasonable economic model.
Steve Wang, I think, is going to take us to the issue of outsourcing.
Thank you for coming to London Business School. And after reading so many useless cases on strategy, I already forgot my question. So can you help me, Professor, read my question?
You've forgotten your question. Fantastic.
That's candid.
That's really candid, and I'm just making a note of his name. The question, I think, Stephen, that was burning in your mind yesterday is a recent trend has to do with business outsourcing to achieve low cost. Companies move manufacturing to China, to accounting functions to India, engineering work to Poland. It's a good question. While it improves the living standard of people in emerging markets and reduces prices for consumers, it may sacrifice jobs in developed economies, which lead to protectionism in policy making. Would you please comment on how the world can strike a delicate balance on this issue? Good question, I think.
Yeah, and I think you covered every element of it. The have-nots get what the haves have through this, which is all good as we become more intertwined economically. The chances for peace are better and better. As far as you make yourself more competitive here in a global economy by doing it, that's why unemployment is so low in this country if they've done it successfully, because you create more competitive companies here that can compete with global companies elsewhere that aren't doing it. Look, in the end, people buy the lowest cost, highest value product and service they can get. And you have to provide that. And you can't get around that with any social plan or anything else. Protectionism doesn't work. We've seen it. Go over to Italy. How many times a year? Go to Italy and walk through Turin and look at the Fiat auto plants. Always protected against Japanese imports more than anybody else were. No other business was protected like the Italian automotive industry. Company's totally on its back. been losing hundreds of millions of dollars, if not billions, year after year after year, supported by the government, because they couldn't compete in the global market. Protectionism doesn't work. Being competitive requires you to get the highest value lower, and you've got to keep moving up the food chain in the developed countries, and there's no other answer to it.
Scott McCormick has a question which is linked to this in terms of careers. Is Scott here? Yeah, very good. So he's just here. He may even be able to shout. No, the microphone's coming very, very quickly, but it's a question about the career implications of this issue.
Yeah, just a related question. Given the surge in globalism and resulting volatility due to layoffs, redundancies, and so on, what advice or career guidance would you give for someone in business school that was looking to stay ahead of the curve and not be on the wrong side of that curve, not be reactive to it?
Well, without question, you want to pick industries where the competitive dynamics of the industry look very attractive to you. I mean, going into widget making in Manchester would not seem to be a very good idea. Going into the pharmaceutical industry in the biotech area might seem to be a very good idea. So I'd pick industries where the growth prospects were highest. I would not run to the automotive industry tomorrow morning. I'd try and select industries. And I'd try and put myself in an environment where I had a hell of a shot. But the number, with a degree from the London Business School, the thing I would do most of all is have guts. Don't be cautious. You've taken a swing, you're young, you got a great degree, you got credentials. The worst thing you can do is be cautious. Go start a business. Go be an entrepreneur. Take a swing. Take the wildest swings in the world before you're 40, before you get obligation. The last thing you want to do is be a cautious bureaucrat right out of here. A disaster. A disaster. So the last thing you ought to be even thinking about is the possibility of a redundancy. You've just come to a great school, you got great credentials, you got the world by the ass, go take it.
There's evidence that people take that to heart, because we do actually run entrepreneurship programs here, and they are some of the entrepreneurship electives are some of the really the most popular courses that many of the MBA students.
Well, in our tour in the U.S., it was really exciting to see at business schools, 15 to 20% minimum of the kids were going out and starting their own businesses, and they were standing in line with a book signing and talking to us about the business they were starting, and they ranged from A to Z. Then this other thing we have going in America, it's an organization called YEO, the Young Entrepreneurs Association, and we ran to that in our book business because we went to a national meeting of them, and so now every city we go to, we go talk to the entrepreneurs group. I mean, it's like getting a shot right in the veins. These people are running $5 million, $10 million businesses. They're excited as can be. There's a couple hundred in every city, and they're just having the vitality makes you feel so great about the country and its prospects. We have large venture capital markets. We have great private equity markets. So there's lots of opportunity for people with ideas to go do stuff. And it's America's greatest hope. If that same question were asked to me in America, I would lay out the most rosy picture of startup companies that are from A to Z. We went to a meeting, Susie and I, in Atlanta, with the top 50 companies in Atlanta, top growth companies in Atlanta. The criteria were they had to be $100 million in sales, and they had to be growing 25% a year for 3 years. There were 50 companies there. I never heard of one of the names. Not one. And they were growing. The winning company was a company that went into, of all industries, the airline industry. It was a de-icing concept that they found a way to de-ice planes faster than anybody else. They had grown from 0 to $134 million, employing 700 employees in 30 months. with a new idea for de-icing planes. Now you're going to the crappiest industry in the world with a de-icing idea that isn't exactly high-tech, and you've added 700 jobs, and you're blowing it through the roof. That's the way you got to think.
Any questions from entrepreneurs, just deviating from my little list of questions here, but budding entrepreneurs or people considering entrepreneurial startups, any questions you'd like to put in at this point? No, there is. Yes, there is. One here.
Jack, you were 30
Shout.
years old.
You probably need the mic. That'd be a good idea.
If you were 30 years old right now and you were just getting out of business school, what industry would you get into as an entrepreneur? What would you do?
Well, I don't have a particular de-icing idea to speak of, but I would definitely find my way, if I were going into a company or an idea, into the convergence of biotechnology and information technology and nanotechnology. I mean, I come from, as Nigel does, from a chemical engineering background where we used to make molecules first in beakers and then in kettles. Now you make them in tubes as thin as the human hair. You make them rapidly. The changes in the world from biotechnology are going to be so unbelievable. And the ethical challenge it's going to present over the next 25 years are enormous. I mean, it's just fermenting area. And if you look in Boston, we have a 128 corridor that's known as Silicon Alley there, and same as Silicon Valley in the West Coast. Amgen and Genentech are out there doing it and there's a whole row of little Genentechs down the road. And in Boston, there's a company called Genzyme, and there's rows of Genzymes, office after office with entrepreneurs starting up. It's the chip business all over again now in biotechnology.
Talking of new opportunities, just more generally, is Siddharthan Viramani, is this person anywhere near the front, not even in the room, has an interesting question here which says, what is or are the next possible countries that will be the focus of the world in terms of economic industrial development after China and India? I guess we could talk about China and India first, but the question is, what next?
Well, I mean, they're going to so dwarf the opportunities. Now, there are all kinds of opportunities, as you all know, in Eastern Europe. When we go to Eastern Europe, it's like another planet compared to traveling through Western Europe. And the excitement in Bratislava or Budapest or Warsaw is pulsating. I mean, we were in Warsaw 3 months ago on a panel with a Polish entrepreneur who was ranting and raving and screaming at the Poles, saying, "You've got to get out of here. This is too high cost a place. You've got to move to the Ukraine. That's where the opportunity is, not in silly Poland." I mean, here we are thinking Poland's a great step to get out of Western Europe to move to Poland. This guy's already in the Ukraine and moving further, you know. I mean, so I think there's a country for everybody in every deal that will fit the particular issue they had. We had this fellow in Poland that wants to become the Bangalore for Europe, if you will. He thinks that he's grown a software company from nothing to $400 million very rapidly, and his idea was to be the Bangalore, what Bangalore is to the US and increasingly to Europe, for Europe. So there's Poland doing all kinds of things. I think the opportunities in the East, in Europe, and Hungary, and in India and China, dwarf talking about African opportunities and other things. I mean, the vastness of them.
Right. Our canvas is getting very wide, and I'd like to open the floor now. I have many more questions in front of me.
There's some hands over there and hands over there.
Yep, there's two down the side here after this one, which we'll come to, please. Thank you. But first,
stand up and get a mic.
Yeah, exactly. Two on the left-hand side.
Do you believe in outsourcing? But Jeffrey Emmott just sold off Jekis in India, which is the outsourcing business. Did you agree with that decision? Or what is the rationale, you believe?
Totally. What Jeff did was, Nigel started that, and what we built there got to be too big. It was 18,000 employees in that particular unit that got sold off. We were running the danger of becoming Any of you familiar with the parts suppliers to the automotive industry, Delphi and Visteon? We were building a bureaucracy. We were building our own supply. They weren't getting competitive. They were now an arm of GE. So we had all the GE stuff in there, and our pricing was no longer effective. We had grown steadily for 10 years, built up an 18,000 person operation. So we spun them out, kept half of it, and let them go on their own, free at last, as they said. And now they're in the market, they got a stock price, and they're all savagely trying to grow the business with non-GE clients, where they have to be more competitive. So if you have a captive for too long, a captive decays. It becomes back to that question on bureaucracy in the back. So Jeff made just the right call to get rid of that. Now we have we have an R&D center there, we have all kinds of other things there, but this particular operation had gotten too big. And you see in the United States now, both Visteon and Delphi, both probably going to file for Chapter 11 because they couldn't exist without the mothership feeding them, and then they don't get competitive. And we were running the danger there.
And keeping a stake in the business going on, is that a signal, just a signal that you actually believe in the business and think there's value creation longer term?
We think there's real value creation. So if we hold the chips, we hope these guys go wild and get lots of business and we cash in.
Down on the left-hand side, there's a question from a lady on the left-hand side. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Felicia from Nigeria. You talk about having guts, and I want to ask, have you ever been in a situation where you made a business deal and you really didn't have a good idea of how it was going to turn out? And how did you cope? What did you do? What were the things you had to think about? What did you have to do in that situation?
Probably.
And then as an aside, for the budding entrepreneurs, Eastern Europe is there, Nigeria is also there. Everybody's looking at Nigeria. Richard Branson is coming from Nigeria.
Laura Tyson, who we saw before the session, would second the comment on Nigeria. She had a session in New York with the woman minister of finance in Nigeria, who said was incredibly impressive. And the rules going into Nigeria and the structure going into Nigeria, she commented on very favorably. So she would support that. As far as doing deals that I didn't know how they were going to turn out, would you believe about half of them? I mean, look, you take a swing. I've got some person coming into me, Nigel or somebody else, selling me. I've never seen a deal in my day, in my job as CEO, where the returns weren't at least 20%. That's the rule for coming in the room, I guess. So the charts always look good. Now the question is, of course, half of them didn't ever reach that goal, but that was the deal as they come in. Now your goal is to bet on the people and the passion that are there, the case they make, and from pattern recognition, or gut, if you will, same thing, take a swing with them. But you don't know the path. I mean, if you knew that, you'd have a different, better job.
Question at the front here.
Hi, Jack. Many of us at the beginning of our MBA, we start working from a multinational. Through the information experience in own business, we end up actually working for entrepreneurs, small companies. But on the other hand, big corporations, multinationals, are actually losing that entrepreneurial spirit, entrepreneurial energy. So from a GE point of view, so from big companies' point of view, how would you keep that energy in-house?
Well, you fight like hell to keep breaking it down to smaller units. You fight to give everybody their own head, their own feeling of running their own show as early as possible. And as things get bigger, you break it out. The sale of the Indian system, it just got too big, too bureaucratic. You try and do that example all the way through the system by keeping them, by breaking them up into smaller pieces, giving people their heads, giving people controls, giving people clear measurements that they can go achieve. Once it gets up into a big unit, you lose a lot of the stuff.
Can I ask just a subsidiary on this? Because when you break organizations down into small bits, it gives clarity and focus and opportunity, and the people running those bits, I'm sure, have a whale of a time. when you then try and get cooperation between those different bits, is that a challenge? If those bits become more interdependent than you once imagined?
Not if you have as a value, a core value, boundaryless behavior and sharing ideas. And if you measure people and reward and punish on values. So if you've got a horse's neck who holds all the ideas themselves or doesn't want to play in the cooperative effort of sharing ideas, you can them or you punish them. And they don't get promoted. It's a value. You get promoted based on your values and your results, both. And if you don't have the right values, and you gotta mean it. You know, one of the things that companies don't do very well is when they let somebody go, they let them go generally with the phrase that says they want to spend more time with their family and the children, and they're leaving for personal reasons, even though they stole from the company, okay? Now, you ought to, if somebody has an integrity violation in your company, you ought to hang them right in public and let everybody know this person is leaving because they stole. This person is leaving because they weren't boundaryless. This person is leaving because they had great results, but they did not buy into diversity. They did not buy into globalization. They did not buy into something else and say what it was. And not have these quiet exits that do nothing to demonstrate for the organization what the values are. Values count. If you write a set of values, you have to walk them every day, you have to live them every day, and you have to reward and punish around them.
Question in the back, very clear. Thank you. Your question, Carl.
Hi, we've been talking today about integrity in organizations, values, and also going into developing markets. Could you comment on sort of multinationals and their responsibilities to the markets in developing countries when they enter those developing countries?
I'm sorry, the very end of it I didn't get.
I didn't get it either. Could
Sure,
you say it
it's
again,
just
rather more slowly, please?
Yep, responsibilities of multinationals as they enter developing markets.
Being clearly to bring best practices. I mean, in other words, if you go to a developing country, you have to bring global standards. If you're building a chemical plant, you can't build a chemical plant that's not up to the world standard environment. The same one you'd build in New York City. You have to have labor standards that are the same in terms of treatment of people. You don't have to pay global wages. You pay local wages. But you try to attract the best people by having the best jobs and the best wages in the place. You don't pollute. You don't corrupt. You have a set of values. You have a real responsibility. You mentor kids in school. I mean, as in Indonesia, we had 4,000 mentors mentoring kids in inner city schools in Indonesia that were doing a fantastic job. The Asian crisis came, our business shrunk. Again, a winning business. It must be a winning business to do that. We weren't winning then, so we had to cut back on that and leave some of Indonesia. But winning companies have an enormous responsibility wherever they go. Losing companies can't do anything. They can't give back to the community. They can't pay taxes. Their employees are scared. Winning companies employ. GE has 55,000 people mentoring kids in inner cities around the world because they're a winning company. They can afford to give back, and their people know they have job security.
Two questions very close to each other, just here. So let's go to both.
Mr. Welch, thank you very much for coming and not stopping at your first book, Straight from the Gut, and going on to this one. I think it'll be a good reference for all of us. My question is more on leadership in general. So if you take yourself back to 1980 when you were appointed as CEO,
yep.
When I know in Connecticut, where the corporate headquarters was, there were one of your colleagues heard somebody over talking, saying that you weren't the right guy for the job, and there was a lot of naysayers saying that they should have picked someone else for CEO. Looking back historically at your life, you seem to be a fighter, and you were very competitive when you were in Massachusetts in sports, and you overcame a lot of objectives. So my question is, when they said you couldn't make it, how did that make you feel? And did you in turn use that to be a better leader for GE?
No, I faced reality. I would say that fellow had about 65% of the people on his side who felt I was the wrong person. I came from an entrepreneurial side of the company. I was the first employee in plastics. I hired the second employee and the third employee. We built a rebellious group up there. We built a several billion-dollar business. We brought in kegs of beer on Friday. We partied like hell at every celebration we possibly could. The corporation didn't know much about us because it was called General Electric, and they didn't know anything about plastics, so they didn't bother us. I then got other divisions, medical, and they were added on one by one, and I never left Pittsfield, Mass. I stayed out of headquarters for my entire career for the last 2 years. So I had a cadre, a band of probably 35% of the people who had dealt with me, who thought it was great that I got the job, and I had 65% of old GE who was scared to death about me getting the job. And so I had to develop, and I brought with me the methods that worked for me. Fun, candid evaluations, celebrations. Look, you've got to make work fun. Some of these people I think any one of you that goes out to work and becomes a manager and is a bore should slap yourself, right in front of the mirror. Nothing's worse than boring managers, dullards who sit there and give orders and tell people what to do. We had lots of that. We had lots of bureaucracy. We had time. I was number 27. I literally had a number. My layer was 27. There were 26s, 25s, 24s, 23s, all the way down to 1s. I changed that to 5 bands. So people weren't moving across the country to go from 12 to 13, disrupting their families, tearing up their lives. So I had a really a wonderful group of supporters that we gradually got to convince the company after several years that this was the way to go. By the time I left, we had surveys that 92% of the people loved the management and loved the direction of the company. When we started, we were below 50. So, it was a long road. It was 21 years, and it wasn't overnight. You don't make these changes overnight. I'd say it was 7 or 8 years before we really had full buy-in. These things aren't easy. But I wanted GE to use its size, act with this muscle of a big company, but the speed of a speedboat. My predecessor, who was a terrific guy, had the guts to pick me, said he was picking me to shake the place up because he didn't want to, used to give speeches about how GE was the Queen Mary. It could handle heavy waters. I wanted GE to be a little tiny speedboat. And I use that metaphor all the time. I don't want to be the Queen Mary. I don't want to be this lumbering thing. I want you all to think you're driving Ferraris, racing through the streets. That's how I want you to think. I don't want you to think you're a big lumbering tank, powerful, etc., but not fast.
There's an interesting, if I may, just before we come to more questions here, is Hugh Wood here? Is he near a microphone? Hugh Wood? There he is. I'll let him ask the question himself, but it's kind of connected to something you've just been saying. But Hugh?
Casting my mind back as well.
Casting your mind back. Would you like me to remind you?
Basically, how do you feel about the fact that nowadays quite a lot of companies are very candid about essentially mimicking lots of the management systems that GE, I think I read the guy at Siemens recently talking about how they're very much managing the business along the same lines that you developed for GE. I just wondered how you feel about that. Is that
terrific? No, that's what I'm. Look, this book, Winning, that my wife and I wrote, or my wife wrote and I talked, really is a codification of a way of doing business. It isn't the only way, but it is a way. It is a defined way. And the reason it's selling like crazy in the U.S., and hopefully around the world, and the money all goes to charity, so we're not here to make a buck off a thing. $12 million goes to scholarships for inner city kids, not a nickel to us. But we're out selling this book because we believe it makes companies more competitive, it makes business more fun, and it makes winning companies hum. And in the States, you'll see managers come by and buy 20 for their team, and they're giving out a chapter on candour, a chapter on budgeting, a chapter on strategy. And they're having these sessions. And the people are saying, debates. Have we got enough candour? Do we have too much? Do we want more? Or are we satisfied where we are? Here's the way they're saying you ought to budget. Do we want to do it that way, or don't we? Or do we want to do it our own way? Or do we want to modify ours somewhere in between? That turns our crank, when people are debating the ideas in the book. This is just one way of doing it. It's not the only way. It's not perfect. It's the best way we know. And to see Siemens announce Klaus von Kleinville yesterday basically saying, I'm going the GE way, it's right in the veins, right in the veins.
I have to say, I read the chapter on budgeting last night, and it confirmed all my worst fears about what budgeting can be and how it can get better. And a really useful chapter, actually. But very good. There's someone here who's been waiting very, very patiently next to, here we go. And then we're going to go to the back. There's someone right at the back. Thank you. So firstly here, thank you.
I have a question, how you work with people. Suppose you're thrown in a very culturally diverse team and you have to meet...
I'm sorry, I'm finding that...
You are thrown in a culturally diverse team with the people you have to work with, and you are on a very tight deadline. What key criteria you use to differentiate the performers versus the non-performers, and do you change that criteria depending upon the different composition of the team?
I apologize. I
think that was a question about differentiating between high performers and
low performance in a very tight deadline.
Tight deadline.
Yeah.
Well, you're not evaluating people in a snapshot decision. People are evaluated over periods of time. So one person might not perform so well under pressure at a certain time. That's not going to be that's a snapshot in time that'll go into the longer term evaluation of that person. But you wouldn't say, but you would say, if somebody did something extraordinary, you would make a celebration right there in front of them, in front of the group, to reward somebody. One of the problems you have is people don't like to say, Joe or Mary did a fabulous job. And I'd say, why wouldn't you give them the award publicly? Oh, I wouldn't want to give it to them publicly because I'd embarrass the others. Well, if you can't explain to the others why Mary or Joe are getting this, then you shouldn't be giving it to them. If they did something extraordinary, let the world know that's the behavior you want. But you wouldn't evaluate somebody on a snapshot for a long period.
Sure. I think right at the back. Thank you.
Hello. My question is probably linked to this point. We saw that there is always more and more a trend towards short term. CEOs boards which last even, I don't know, 1 year, a couple of years. And there is all this pressure from the markets, financial markets. So I would like to know your opinion and how you approach the relationship with the investors.
You know, we've been in an hour and 10 minutes. That's usually longer than it takes for that question. That question has been asked to me since 1971 in every meeting I've ever been in. How do you balance short and long? There's more pressure on short and long. I've never been to a G employee meeting where there wasn't a screaming session about we're too short-term focused. Well, I was CEO for 21 years. That's a reasonable period of time. And we grew faster at the end than we did at the beginning. Look, your job as a leader, your only one is to differentiate resources, allocate resources. And you've got to eat and you've got to dream. And you've got to do both. Any jackass can get short-term results. They can eat. They can squeeze for 1 year, 2 years. Any jerk can say, look, to the financial community, come back in about 5 years, I'll have my dreams implemented. You'll get no money. You won't be able to raise capital. You've got to make those calls. That's where a good one is differentiated from a weak one. If you can eat, that's do well in the short term and invest for the long term, that's what your job is. You have no other job. I mean, anybody can do one or the other. You're at the London Business School to learn how to do both. That is what you're really learning here. with all this strategy and all that stuff, you're learning that ability, hopefully, to make the calls. I'm going to bet on this right now, but I'm not going to forget that over there. So I'm not going to bet that much on the short term. I'm going to save some for this.
Jack has very skillfully just reminded us we're into our last 5 minutes, so I'm going to try and squeeze a couple of questions in as fast as possible, and then we'll try and draw this to a conclusion, sadly, but right at the back.
Okay, just a quick one. When a company has a hugely successful CEO, a transformational man, succession planning can be an acute problem. Do you think GE has successfully managed this process and has appointed a person? They may have appointed a manager to manage the assets rather than a new leader to drive the business.
Do I think GE? The question is, company succession plan. Am I happy with the GE succession plan?
This comment on the succession planning process.
Could you keep the microphone near you, please?
A comment on the succession planning process itself, particularly with a CEO with such a large legacy. And is there a danger that in the process people err on the side of caution and seek a manager really to manage the legacy rather than seeking another transformation leader to take the business forward?
It's a great question. It's really good. In our case, we worked on it for 6 years. We had 22 candidates initially identified. We had 3 of the most obvious, 7 in the probable category, and 12 in the long shot category in 1994. Of the 3 finalists, they all came from the 12 in the long shot category, which shows you that people do change, minds change, situations change, and you can't lock yourself in to any one or another. We ultimately got down to 3 people. All 3 were brilliant, exciting leaders. We picked one. The other one went to Home Depot. The other one went immediately to 3M. I believe that in any race like that, you want the 2 people that don't get it to get out of there. You don't want groups forming around, because each person had their own group, and you want the CEO to have a clean slate. In this case, the person I selected, I knew was a change agent, self-confident, captain of the football team at Dartmouth, done all kinds of things. The first thing he did was change the slogan. We bring good things to life, to imagination at work. He sold off some businesses right away. He bought a couple of big businesses, and people say to me, God, he's changing everything. How do you feel? I feel wonderful. I mean, I'm not tired. I just didn't have any more ideas for that business. And we wanted fresh eyes. We wanted to repot the plant and have somebody come in and change it. And he has not had a down quarter since he's gotten the job, even though he got the job on September 9th, or 10th, I guess, 10th. The day before the disaster, he got the job. And in the last 3 quarters, he's grown every quarter over 20% in earnings. With the change mix of businesses. So it's exciting as hell to see it happen. I mean, the last thing you'd want to do is to retire and have somebody manage the same stuff you were managing. Shake it up, change it. Now, the one thing that has stayed constant is the people that are there are all the people that were there when I was there. We bought into the same human resource system. We bought into the value system. We bought into the type of people. But the people are now doing things in a different fashion they were doing when I was there.
I think we've got time for one more quickly, if I may, just to the right, I'm afraid. That's kind of it. Yeah.
How you doing, Mr. Welch?
Hi.
Thanks for coming to London Business School. I just wanted to quickly ask, you talked quite a bit about values. You talked about, we talked a bit earlier on about going into developing countries and operating there, and you've made clear your feelings about bureaucracy. I guess my real question is, a lot of times when you make the decision to go into a new market, the values of the corporation may be in some cases at odds with either the culture that you're going to operate in, or in some cases the bureaucracy. I guess I'm particularly thinking about Yahoo being in the press lately with the whole row in China and information sharing, which some people say is illegal, some people just think is unethical. Have you experienced that? How do you navigate that as a multinational that obviously wants to go into new markets? And what are your thoughts basically?
Well, the biggest problem that we had in the 80s was the global corruption problems. I mean, some countries actually had bribes as a deduction. Developed countries in Western Europe, bribes as a deduction. In Germany, for example. And we couldn't do that. And we would lose business in some of the developing countries. And over time, having your principles hold, people ended up coming your way. It takes time, but bureaucrats and policymakers don't want to end up in corruption eventually as countries change and modernize. The other thing I think that happens, let's talk about values. Our basic values in GE are giving people voice and dignity. Giving them dignity by letting them know where they stand, letting them speak out, letting them have voice by listening to their ideas. Those values translate in any culture. People say, how can you bring these same values to China? Well, people in China want voice. They want to be respected. They want to know where they stand. Evaluations work. Thailand, which is a very soft country, very interested in candid evaluations of performance and where they're going. People want to know how they're perceived in organizations. It's reality. It is reality. And so if you do that, and you do it in a transparent, open way, you will be welcomed in about every culture.
I want to squeeze in one quick question on behalf of my friends sitting in the room here. In the book, you have a part about what's the single most important question to ask someone at an interview. And there's a question here, it's attributed to two different people, which is why I'm going to read it out. But it's an important one for people sitting in this room. It says, when London Business School students go for their job interviews, is there any one question they must answer, if not asked, and volunteer if necessary, before they leave the interview?
Well, we have a page in the book that I'd like to go to first of all, rather than go to the one question. I think there are 5 things that you consider, and the book has a chart on this. As you go out to interview a company, there are 5 things you ought to consider. Number 1, do the people that you're going to work with, are they your type of people? Do they have same sensibilities? They laugh at the same stuff? Or are they, in fact, do you have to put on a persona to be there? If you're a stiff and you're going to a loose place, it might not work too well. So try and figure out the sensibilities of the people as well as you can. Secondly, go to a place, if you're not going to be an entrepreneur and start something, go to a place where you can learn, where you're not the smartest person in the room, where there are people all around you that can teach you things. This is a never-ending learning process, so look for that in the company. Look, do they have smart people? Third, go to a company, you've got a brand now, and the brand's London Business School. Now, don't blow the brand by going to a lousy company. Go to a company that has a great brand, you can use that brand to go to the next one. Microsoft, for example. If you went to Microsoft 10 years ago, you could be hired by anybody and they'd say, I want a Microsoft person. When I was a chemical engineer starting out my plastics business, I used to search, and whenever we could hire somebody from DuPont, we thought we had hit the jackpot. Now, some of them were dopes, but we were thrilled to get them because they came from DuPont. They must have known a lot. Fourth, make a deal with the company you're going to. Make sure you make a deal with yourself. You know what the deal is. If you're going there because you don't want to travel, because your spouse doesn't want you to travel, or you can't travel, or you like the region, know the reasons know the deal you made. Don't go then and bitch it's a lousy company when you made a deal to go there for other reasons. And finally, never go to a place where the work doesn't turn your crank. where it really doesn't turn you on? Why would you go do something coming from this great school with this great degree and not have your crank turned by the work that you accept? So that's the only grid I know to go at that. If you're interviewing people, be sure as hell you ask them why they left their last job, and let them just talk for as long as they can possibly talk, and you'll learn more about them than anything else you can do.
I'm going to have to stop there. I'm going to apologise to everyone in this room, and certainly the 15 hands that went up just now when I said our last question. Jack has kindly agreed, and Susie, to come to a lunch with us. There's a group of people somewhere else in the school waiting us right now, so forgive me for sort of stopping us here. I'd like to say thank you to Jack. I'm sure Nigel's going to say something much more formal, but thank you for the candour and wit and humour and energy and excitement which just exudes from them. So
Thank you, Rob. Thanks a lot. Thank you very much.